A Lantern, Chapter 16. It was several weeks before Abby could get around again to do all her work. Christine or Sarah came over and helped a little each day. Service finds its greatest opportunity and its least begrudged hours of labor among neighbors in a new community through which lines have not been drawn and into which class has not yet come. Abby could not get over the loss of her little son. Always she saw him in the shadowy outline among the others. All her life she was to say, now he would be 7. Today he would be 12. He could have voted today for the first time. Yes, Abby Deal was a born mother. One of those women who love the touch of baby flesh, who cuddle little children to them, who, when their own babes have grown, catch up some other woman's child to fondle. On the day in June in which Abby did her first full day's work, the grasshoppers lifted their wings and flew to other fields. As complete and unified as departure as their coming had been. There was no small grain that summer, but a half-hearted corn crop seemed on the way. Settlers by the score were returning east. Scarcely a day passed which did not see some forlorn group go by the house. Many of the covered wagons carried statements painted on their wagons, which would have been humorous if they had not been so tragic. Going back to Ma and Pa was one. Another held a huge caricature of a grasshopper strangling a man with his forelegs and antennae, and the laconic words, "He wins." Abby, standing at the door, watching one of these bedraggled-looking outfits pass, said bitterly to Will, "When do you think our time is coming? Look at the clouds, Will. Even the clouds seem always going east." Will did not answer. He turned on his heel and went down to the straw-covered dugout which served as a barn. Watching him go, in his faded blue shirt and overalls, with their many patchings, and his dingy old hat, Abby called to her mind the fine figure he had made in his wedding suit. Fine enough to draw the attention of any exacting young woman. 10 years ago, and the minister at home had said you could do anything with your life. But that was not so. Life did things to you. 10 years. Small wonder that love would break under circumstances like these. Standing there in the soddy door, she seemed 2 personalities. One argued bitterly that it was impossible for love to keep going when there was no hope for the future. Suggested that there was no use trying to keep it going. The other said sternly that marriage was not the fulfillment of a passion. Marriage was the fulfillment of love. And love was sometimes pleasure and sometimes duty. She said suddenly to herself, "You Judas, as though hard luck could kill my love for Will. Will's not to blame. It's a fine love that a little bad luck can smother. It can't touch it. It can't. Love is the light that you see by. It's all in the world we've got to light our way, and it takes both of us to keep it bright. And I'm not doing my share. I'm not. I'm glum and sad and discouraged. And I'm not going to be anymore. There are only 2 things that can help us, and that's our courage and our love. From this very minute on, I'm going to try and cheer Will up more. I'm through being downhearted." She turned to the children. They were all around the table looking at a little picture Margaret had drawn. Margaret was always drawing. Abby ran to them, closed warm maternal arms around all 3, and bumped them together in a return of girlish spirits, so that they laughed at her unusual playfulness. Their faces sparkling because Mother was full of fun. How readily they responded to all her moods, and how careful she must be with those childish impressions. "You shall wear them, Margaret," she kissed her little daughter. "You shall wear them yet." "Wear what, Mother?" "The pearls." "What are pearls, Mother?" "Wait, I'll show you." She got it from under the bed, the old calf-skin box, and the children gathered close with excited anticipation. She took the pearls out and ran them through her fingers. "Oh, Mother, the pretty beads!" Margaret's gray eyes glowed. "Shucks, I'd rather have a watch," from the masculine Mac. Little John was not even interested. Abby laughed and held them up, their creamy luster inappropriate against her work-worn hand. She put them around Margaret's little sunburned neck, and they hung down over the dingy grey calico dress with incongruous comparison. "You shall wear them, darling. Some day you shall. We're going to make it come true. We've got to make it come true." She caught Margaret to her. "It takes faith and courage and love and prayer and work and a little singing to keep up your spirits, but we're going to do it." In September, Mac and Margaret started to school, a little new one-room frame building which someone already had christened the Woodpecker School. Little Emma Lutz started too, and 2 more of the Reinmuller boys. Christine's ideal being that it would be a good thing for them to know how to write their names at least and figure up bushels. On good days the children trudged along Grassy Way, and on bad days Will stopped his work long enough to take him in the wagon. Abby shed copious tears the first morning they started, and then laughed at her own inconsistency. "I wanted them to have a school closer than Sodom to go to, and then I cry when they do have," she said to Will. But Will said he knew how she felt. Will was always so understanding, Abby thought gratefully. That winter of 76 and 77 was another one of great hardship, but like many things in life, it had its pleasant side. A reading circle was formed and met at the Woodpecker School every Friday night. Its members wore ribbon badges upon which Sarah Lutz and Abby had printed the mysterious letters SCLRC, which, when the mystery was eliminated, were discovered to stand for the title of Stove Creek Precinct Literary Reading Circle. The membership was divided, like all Gaul, into 3 parts, and if were not Belgians, Helvetians, and Germans who fought and bled, at least the Reds, the Blues, and the Yellows met in forensic phrase. One Friday night the Reds performed, the next 2 Fridays the Blues and the Yellows, respectively. And on the 4th Friday night, a big contest was staged in which the star members of the various colors mingled in one grand rainbow spectrum, with the people imported from outside the precincts sitting in judgment upon the efforts. That winter, the schooner Hesperus was wrecked. Little Paul Dombey died, Hamlet met his father's ghost, and the Raven quothed more times than there were meetings. New pieces being at a premium as they were. Whole families came ensconced on straw in the bottom of wagon boxes, which had been put on bobsleds. Everyone brought heated soapstones or hot flat irons, as more than one load came from 20 miles away. The Henry Lutzes brought their reed organ in the sleigh each time, so there was always music. Abby was put on for a group of songs whenever the Blues performed, and always led the chorus singing Three Blind Mice and Scotland's Burning were the favorite rounds. As for the favorite choruses, while great partiality was shown towards Juanita, Annie Laurie, and the Revive Us Again, for sheer volume there was nothing like Pull for the Shore to open the throttle. Young blades who could not carry a tune were filled with an irresistible impulse to sing whenever the lifeline was brought out, and when the sailors began to make more rapid progress towards the lighthouse, they would grab oars, as it were, open their mouths, and bellow like young steers. In September of 1877, Abby gave birth to a girl. The high bleating cries of the child were music to the mother who could never erase from her mind the misery of that whispering silence of 2 years before. They named the little girl Isabel. Maybe she'll be the lovely lady, Abby thought as she ran her fingers through the tiny moist ringlets of reddish-brown hair. The first Sunday Abby could get out, Will hitched up the horses to the lumber wagon, and they drove over to the dedication of the new frame church near the Lutz store. Henry Lutz had donated the land, and $1 collected here and another one there had bought the lumber which was hauled from Nebraska City. All the men of the community for miles around had given their time for the labor, and now a little unpainted church stood at the 4 corners. It had been 9 years now since the deal in Lutz and Reinmuller wagons had first crawled across the prairie. A few fences had appeared, and the old Buffalo Trail had begun to take upon itself the semblance of a roadway. Tracks were plainly visible, worn by the feet of 1,000 oxen and horses and the wide iron rims of the dingy prairie schooners. Between the trails, the grass still flaunted, and the graceful goldenrod nodded its plumed head as a queen bows when her subjects pass by. Sweet William and Blue Phlox, Mousetail and Wild Indigo crowded the grass of the roadway. And when the tiny Primrose was gone, Yellow and White Mustard elbowed their way in to take the place. The cottonwoods had shot up with unbelievable growth. The leaves, with their peculiar double motion, always seemed twinkling, always dancing. The silhouettes of the grayish-green clumps against the prairie sky were Abby's poetry and her paintings, her sermons and her songs. Cedartown now had its church and its school, its store and its blacksmith shop, and 6 houses assembled in the same vicinity. And it had its cemetery, for Henry Lutz had given the community the knoll where Danny lay. There were 7 mounds inside the picket fence, where herding stock could not trample. Yes, in a new country, you have to make a cemetery. Crops were no better. They were put in each year with hope, and they came up with promise, but the dry, fluffy clouds scudded high across the blue sky without moisture, or the hot winds blew, and the settlers would harvest a scant half crop. In some way, Will and Abby held body and soul together. In some way, the children seemed to get enough to eat, to thrive and grow. In the fall of '79, a man with a violin case stopped at the house and asked if he could have supper. He had been drinking, and Will, contrary to his usual hospitable manner, talked with him for some time before he decided to invite him to stay. After the meal, the guest took out the violin and played for the family. The music seemed to steady him, for when he drew the bow across the strings, all the wild, sweet bird songs of the forest came from them. To Abby, with her deep-worn love of music, it was enchantment. "Can you," she asked when he had finished, "can you play a song called 'The Lady of the Lee'?" For answer, he drew the bow again, and the melody came lightly, delicately, hauntingly. Abby had not sung it for 4 or 5 years, but now she threw back her head and took the air to the violin's accompaniment. "O Lady of the Lee, fair and young and gay was she, beautiful exceedingly, the Lady of the Lee." In the sod house with its cook stove and the turned-over boiler and the burning twisted hay, with its crude whatnot and its sod bed, its store-box bookshelves and its burlap floor covering, she put into her voice all the longing of her heart, all the vague hopes for the best that life could give her children. For she had gold and she had land, everything at her command, the Lady of the Lee. It was as though, through sheer force of will, she was trying to make all the desire for her children's future come true, all her dreams for them turn into realities. Dreaming visions longingly, the Lady of the Lee. "You have a good voice," the stranger said soberly. "You ought to do something with it." "There are lots of things one ought to do," Abby replied, and looked over at Will to see whether he had detected the note of bitterness which he had not been able to keep out of her reply. The man put his violin carefully, tenderly into its case. "It's a Stradivarius," he said. "A man in Omaha offered me $600 for it." Will looked up in surprise. "Offered you $600 for a fiddle?" It seemed like a fortune. "And you mean you wouldn't sell it?" "Nope," the man said simply. "I couldn't. Thank you very much for the supper." And he went, a little unsteadily, out of the door. Abby walked over to the small paned half window set in the sod, and looked out at the gray twilight coming across the prairie. The winds that were never still blew past the house in their unending flight. How queer people were. All the folks in the new country were hoarding things, hanging on to old heirlooms. They became their symbols of refinement and culture. Sarah Lutz had a painting that drew your eyes to it the minute you opened the door. Oscar Lutz's wife had a pink quilted bedspread that she kept rolled up in newspapers. Even Christine Reinmuller had a bright blue vase with magenta-colored roses on it, standing on top of the cupboard. They stood for something besides the land and the corn and the cattle. They must hang on to them, never lose them out of their lives. For if lost, everything was lost. She must hang on to the pearls and everything they stood for. Sarah must keep her painting. Martha Lutz her bedspread, Christine her blue vase. Else, what was there in the future for the children? No, Abby said aloud at the soddy window. No, he couldn't sell it. For some time she stood there watching the half-intoxicated man go east across the prairie.